We are in the third chapter of the laws of Teshuvah in the Rambam, Maimonides. Let's see what we got up to last time. Right. Okay, from here we're going to skip to chapter 5. Chapter 5 introduces some very important philosophical issues, and they will occupy us for a while. Top, we mentioned before in a different connection, but we'll start from the beginning. Power is given to every person. Now, the word in Hebrew is reshus. Don't confuse it with permission. As you will see instantly, this is not permission, this is power. If he wants, or decides, or wills, to incline himself to a path, a good path, and to be righteous, the power is in his hand. And if he wants, or wills, or decides to incline himself to a bad path, and to be wicked, the power is in his hands. And as we pointed out, this description is a description of a gradual process. It doesn't say if he wants to be good, he can be good, and if he wants to be bad, he can be bad. No, if he wants to incline himself to a good path and be righteous, that means it's going to be a gradual process, and it may take time. But it's important to know he's talking about free will, and it doesn't happen instantly. The Rambam, it seems quite clear that you don't have the power to simply decide to be perfect and be perfect, even though you have free will. You have the power to start a process by which you will improve. And he says, this is what is written in a famous verse. Now, we have to be very careful here because the Rambam understands this verse quite differently from what all the translations you're familiar with. So, first I'll explain, I'll translate it the way you've seen it. Right. And then I'll explain to you why it's difficult, not wrong, but difficult. And I'll explain to you how Maimonides takes it. The normal translation is, behold, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Behold, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. The question is, who's us? The speaker is God. So we've become like, some would say, God and the angels. But then, like both of them, they're very different, God and the angels. Each of them split the difference. A little bit like this, a little bit like that. Be very, very unclear. Furthermore, it's not clear that the angels know the difference between good and evil. Man got this way by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's how he got that way. So they didn't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So what exactly is this supposed to mean? Not that that's wrong. There are those who take it that way, but it's difficult. Now, Maimonides suggests that we should put in a comma. Put the comma in a different place. He suggests you should read it like this. Hein odavaya kachad, comma. Behold, man has become unique, singular, like one, meaning singular. In what way is he singular and unique? Mimenu ladas tov v'ra, knowing good and evil from himself, by himself, independently, on his own. The knowledge of good and evil is built into him. Now you say, well, that's a very dramatic reading. You know, should we think that that's what the verse really was talking about? What the verse really meant? And then if you speak to an academic, you get the following nonsense. Maimonides was a Spanish philosopher, so of course he took it in a philosophical way, but that's, importing from an external culture and so on and so on. Turns out that Unclus Hager, living 1,000 years before Maimonides, also translates it the same way. He wasn't a Spanish philosopher, but he translated exactly the same way. And Maimonides in the guide mentions that. I'm taking it the way Unclus took it. So that's not a good comment. Now he explains that in detail. Kolomar. The word kolomar in Hebrew means what I said or what was written may not be clear to you, so it needs an explanation. Kolomar always means something's not clear. Hein min zeh shelo adam. This species, or this type, this category of humanity, hoya achad ba'olam, became one in the world. Ve'ein lo min sheni domelo. No other category of beings is similar to him. In this respect, hu me'atzmo b'da'ato u'v'machshavto. He knows from himself, with his understanding and with his thought, Yodea hatov v'hara. He knows the good and the evil. I think it's pretty clear when he says me'atzmo b'da'ato u'v'machshavto, all three qualifications, that we're talking here about something that's internal to the human being. From himself, with his knowledge and with his thought. He knows that there's a good and evil. And he can also do what he decides to do. Nothing stops him from doing good and evil. This he understands. The verse is talking about two things. He's talking about knowledge, and he's talking about power. He's not talking about abstract knowledge that he can't put into practice. No, he has knowledge and power, and therefore he's held responsible for what he does, and therefore all the consequences follow. Now, I think we have to make a few comments here to understand this in a relevant way. What does it mean to know good and evil? In particular, does that mean, when I ask you, is it right to do X? In every case, you are competent to answer whether it's right or wrong to do X? Is that what knowing good and evil means? The answer is no, it does not mean that at all. Because whether X is good or evil might depend upon the facts about X, which you might not know. Knowing good and evil means you're morally competent. Doesn't mean you're omniscient. I'll give you a very simple example. Until about 150 years ago, it was universal medical practice when a person had a fever to bleed him. They used leeches or suction cups to reduce his amount of blood. Now, we don't do that anymore. Can you guess why? Because it's not good for your health, actually. So we don't know. They didn't know that. They thought it was good for your health. There's no moral difference between us and them. We aren't more moral than they are. We haven't achieved any moral insights. We know the facts of health better than they did. So if you ask, is bleeding a person for a fever a good thing to do? That depends not only on your moral understanding, but it depends upon your factual understanding. Practical judgments of good and evil are based on two pillars. One is your moral principles, and the other is your knowledge of the facts. When we say here that he knows good and evil, we're not crediting him with universal knowledge of all facts. We're saying that he knows moral principles. This means it leaves open the possibility of disagreement, even if everyone is born knowing naturally develops principles of good and evil. It leaves open the possibility of differences of opinion about concrete judgments because they may have different grasp of the facts. Some people are persuaded that different people, different cultures, different times have vastly different moral principles. And they wonder about this statement that people are created in such a way that they will naturally develop moral principles, meaning the same moral principles, the right moral principles. And I have two things to say about that. First of all, I think that this impression that different times and different cultures have different moral principles is greatly exaggerated. Did the Nazis have different moral principles from, let's say, Americans, other people in the West? Was there a moral disagreement here? They slaughtered Jews. Let's just take that, let alone the rest of the Second World War. They slaughtered Jews to exterminate Jews. Does that mean that they had different moral principles? The answer is no. And in fact, I think you can demonstrate it, because they made up a myth about Jews. Jews are evil, Jews are destructive, Jews are trying to take over the world, Jews control all the banks, they control all the media, they're poisoning the wells. Jews cost us the First World War, was one of the things they said. Because of the Jews we lost the First World War. They're out to get us. So killing Jews is self-defense. Why did they bother to make up that story? Why didn't they simply say, Jews are nice people, and they're productive, and they're clever, and they're honest today. We just kill them anyway, because we have different values. They didn't say that. They made up the myth so that they could kill them with the old values. Everybody agrees that you can protect yourself. Somebody's out to get you, you can stop it. Everybody agrees to that. So the fact that they made up the myth means that they have the same values as us. Similarly, the American colonists came from Europe and to concocted the idea of manifest destiny, which means from sea to shining sea, we are destined to control the entire continent. There was only one thing, one problem. There were people with red skins in the way, right? What did they do? They said, if you have a red skin, you're not human. If you're not human, we could take your land. They didn't say, yeah, they're humans, but we have guns, so we just take it anyway. They didn't say that, because you can't take land from other people. You're not allowed to do that. It's not right. If you make up a myth that they're not human, then you can do it without changing your values. So the impression that different cultures and different societies and different periods of history have vastly different values is very exaggerated, because they don't take into account their differing description of the facts, which also can generate a moral conclusion. That's one thing, yeah.
Wouldn't there be like certain modern examples in where people seem to have like the same facts, but they're different moral conclusions, like abortion or euthanasia or veganism, things like that?
Well, let's see. You're asking, do they have the same facts and yet they have different moral opinions? Let's say, do they agree on the facts in abortion? Certainly not. The heart of the debate is whether the fetus is human or isn't human. That's a fact. That's not a value, right? And they disagree about that fact. So I think, on the contrary, that's a good example of where the difference is based on, everybody agrees you can't kill human beings. Almost everybody agrees. The vast majority of people do. Peter Singer is off the page, okay? But, on the contrary, that's an example specifically where it turns on a matter of fact.
Wouldn't there be things like infanticide, like you mentioned Peter Singer, so like infanticide, that would be something where some people would say, maybe Peter Singer in certain cases, where it's justifiable, and other people were like, absolutely not, that they have the same facts.
Well, but now, in the modern world, you don't have that. There's no one who permits killing people. And now take, for example, Sparta, children who had various defects were left out to die. Sparta was in continuous war. They felt that if we don't dedicate everything to the war effort, we're all going to be wiped out. These children are a drag on the economy and a drag on our attention and energy, and they're not going to participate in the army. Therefore, to protect the rest of the society, they have to be left. It wasn't trivial. It was a question of moral conflict.
On a more fundamental level, how about like people who just think the ends justify the means, or people who think the opposite, like people who don't think the consequences necessarily. I feel like that's a very fundamental difference. Then.
Okay, I'll do this one also, but then I think you'll see already that these are very, very superficial. End justifies the means, or doesn't justify the means. Nobody believes either of those. Nobody believes either of those. What really is going on is this. You have, let's say, two options, A and B. Each option, if you take the long-term view, each option creates certain consequences. A gives you a package of consequences, and B gives you a package of consequences. And what you're choosing is between this package and this package. The fact that the action of A takes place now, and the consequences are a year from now, plays absolutely no role in the calculation. No one is going to tell you that when a person has gangrene in his foot, and without surgery he's going to die, that it's wrong to cut off his foot. No one's going to tell you that. No one's going to say, the ends doesn't justify the means, then therefore you can't cut off his foot. No one's going to say that. That's not part of the debate. The part that when you have that case where you have either is no surgery and death, or surgery, no foot, and life. Those are the packages. Now you need to choose which package. The whole discussion of ends and means is just misleading. Had nothing to do with real decisions. Okay, so ethics is a complicated subject, but at any rate, I think that's one thing that I want to say, that the idea that different times and different cultures have substantially different moral values is exaggerated, because the idea of the fact hasn't been taken into account. Secondly, I said it carefully a couple of times, but I didn't stress it. What the Rambam is saying is that you're created in such a way that you will naturally develop correct moral values. But your development might not be natural. Your development could be unnatural. Our sources talk about this. So, for example, unless you have some kind of physical damage, human beings are born with the capacity to develop language. They're not born speaking. They're born with the capacity to develop language. Under what conditions? Well, they have to hear a language spoken. If they don't hear a language spoken, they won't speak. So the capacity is to develop language under the appropriate conditions. Here too, we're talking about the capacity to develop values under the appropriate conditions. And if you have conditions which are inappropriate, then you won't develop language in such a way. There are cultures that talk by hand signals, but then at night that's inconvenient, you know. You may be able to see the other guy. Voice carries over a distance. Hand signals are very difficult to see at such a distance, right? So then communication is going to mean something different from them. They haven't discovered a convenient means to communicate, so the communication will be different. You can have a society which, for whatever reason, has pledged itself to certain views and bring up their children with those views, and under those conditions, the normal moral rules may not develop. If Dessler talks about free will and conditions under which it exists, and he imagines a group of thieves living in the hills with their own commune, and they teach their children that stealing is fine, nothing wrong with it, perfectly appropriate. Normally, when children have toys and somebody else takes it away, and they learn that they are hurt by it, and then you shouldn't do what other people are hurt by it, so forth and so on, they learn this. But here, the society is imposing an opposite value on the children. And they never hear anything different. This is an important part of his description, which some people missed. They never hear any opposing view. And they live in the hills, and they go raiding parties out to steal from the highways and the restaurants and so forth and so on. And that's all they ever look for. He says they won't have free will about stealing. You have to at least know that there is such an idea, and some people believe it, for it to be part of your field of choice. If you've never heard of it and never observed it, then you can't be responsible for failing in this way. But that's because the upbringing was unnatural. It wasn't a normal, natural upbringing, and therefore it wasn't developed. So again, what the Rambam is saying is that human beings are created in such a way that they will naturally develop correct moral values if they have a natural, normal upbringing, right? And I don't think we have any obvious complaint against that. Yeah.
Just in the terms of that society that Rabbi Dessler describes, isn't it also based on certain natural patterns that people do follow, in which inside of their society they do have a code, like they still have a moral code between them, but for everyone else they are thieves or
You're assuming that. Why are you assuming that?
or they are just also among the, like it's completely
You can take it. Try it. I have a knife. You're free to try it. I have a knife. I'll protect myself. But that's what you do. You have something, you protect it. Otherwise, the other person can take it. For the recording, he raised the question which some people say about other cases, but among themselves, they must have had a code of not stealing. Otherwise, they couldn't possibly cooperate. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Yeah.
What about stuff like LGBTQ issues where, like, basically people have different views on it, and it's like they do have the same, like, information, so that's, like, an issue where it seems like there are, like, the same information, but people come to very different conclusions.
Okay, we're talking about sexual preferences and identity preferences. One simple way to prove that it's a matter of a matter of fact is to say, I don't think you'll find a single one who believes in those issues who also believes that there is a creator of the universe who's running the affairs of the universe and says no. And that would be a fact. That would just be a fact. But they have to deny that fact. Otherwise, they can't get their view off the ground. That's one of the reasons they have an animus against religion. Right? So again, facts play a crucial role in determining what is right and wrong. It's very, very difficult to escape the web of facts, which play a role in determining what should be right and what should be wrong. Okay, so now right, and then the verses go on to say that man was expelled from the Garden of Eden because now that he has free will, he can do what is wrong, and then he could go on to eat from the tree of life, and then Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to have that. Okay, now the Rambam goes on. Don't let it cross your mind, this idea that the fools of the non-Jewish world and many uneducated Jews say that the Creator decrees for a person from the beginning of his creation to be righteous or wicked. This is a kind of fatalism. Control is running the world. He makes things be what they be. And just like flowers grow petals, and water flows downhill, and bees make honey, because the Gottleib Baruch Hu created them to be that way. So he created people, some of them to be righteous and some of them to be wicked. That's why he created them. Everything's under his control, and he makes everything happen, including what we would call the moral and spiritual status of a person, which, of course, if a Kadosh Baruch Hu made it that way, wouldn't be moral and spiritual. Don't say that. It's not true. Again, he said in the first paragraph that we know the difference between good and evil, and we have the power to do what we decide to do. Rather, each person is capable of being ra'ui, capable and appropriate to be as righteous as Moses, or as evil as Yeravam ben Nevat. Now that's a big statement. He starts off by saying that God doesn't decree that a person should be righteous or wicked. But he ends off by saying something much more extreme, that a person with his free will could be as righteous as Moses. That's a pretty high standard. And Yeravam, who was a king who worshipped idols and caused his people to worship idols, and is really an extreme case of wickedness. Free will means you have it in your power to be one or the other. So, I think there are two things to say here. First of all, Rabbi Yochanan has an essay in which he asked this question, and he says, if I, Rabbi Yochanan, would use all of my ability to serve God for 1,000 years, I wouldn't come up to Moses' ankles. So, something has to be said about what the Rambam means. And he says, those who are in the Derech Hashem shir will remember this. He says, I could serve God with all my power, just as Moses served God with all his power. Of course, the outcome would be different, because God gave us different powers. But we don't measure being a tzaddik by the output, by the outcome. We measure being a tzaddik by the effort that you put in. We measure being a tzaddik by your effort, not by your accomplishment. And that's the sense in which you could be equal to Moses. Now, this is not just a way to understand the Rambam that makes it more reasonable in our eyes. Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lutzato, in the Derech Hashem, the way of God, says this word for word. He says at least 3 times, your reward and the merit that you earn by your actions is only in proportion to the effort that they require. It's only the effort that you get rewarded for, not the actual performance. And the reason for it, in depth, this now is the Ramchal's philosophy, the reason for it in depth is that all you really control is your will. You don't control your body. Your body is even if you think your body is part of nature, you don't control the laws of nature. You know, a person who thinks that his body is under his control, he may have that illusion until one day he's swimming and he kicks with his left leg and he gets a cramp. And then his will says, kick! And the leg says, no! And the leg doesn't kick. They say, oh, wait a second, maybe I really wasn't in control. Maybe there was a system set up whereby most of the time it does what I want, but doesn't always do what I want. So the idea is that what's under your control is only this ability to make decisions. Beyond that, not. In that respect, you could be equal to Moses because you could exert yourself to the maximum, just as Moses exerted himself to the maximum. That's one thing. As another thing, I've asked people, where did the Maimonides get these 2 examples from? Moses and Yerovim. Who picked them? Why are these the paradigm tzaddikim? And I looked in the back of the Frankel, which has so many references, nobody asked the question. So I was lost. Well, I must say that I don't learn Pirkei Avos regularly. It's not part of our minhagim. I happen to be looking in Pirkei Avos for something, and I think I found the answer. Would you give me a sitter, please? I don't like it because of the microphone. I think I found the answer. I think the answer, thank you, has something very profound to teach us. Shabbos, here we go. Yeah. In Perek Hay of 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, skip the page here. Yeah, this is, in this edition, it's Perek Hay, Mishnah Kaf Aleph, chapter 5, Mishnah number 21. Anyone who creates merit for the public, Zakas Arabim, he will not be led into sin. Anyone who causes the public to sin, he will not have divine help in doing Teshuvah. Okay? 2 different categories. Now the Mishnah cites examples. Moshe Zocha v'Zikas Arabim. Moshe had many great merit in his own performance of mitzvos, and he created merit for the public. Schus Arabim Tolibo. The merit of the public is dependent upon him because he created the conditions under which they could earn merit by bringing them Torah. Yerovam ben Nevat sinned and caused the public to sin, so therefore the sin of the public is attributed to him, and it quotes a verse. So here you have it. Moses on the one hand and Yerovam on the other hand. Now, what does it say about them in this Mishnah? If this is what the Rambam has in mind, I think there's a very profound consequence here. Watch my hat. He's talking about the effect you have on the public. Moses was unique because he had a gigantic effect on the public. That's what qualifies him as top. Yerovam had a terrible effect on the public. That's what qualifies him as bottom. That's what the Mishnah says. The Rambam says he's talking about a tzaddik. Who is a tzaddik? Tzaddik is Moshe. Who is a Rasha? Who is wicked? Yerovam. This is dependent, according to the Mishnah, on his effect on the public. So tzaddik means you have an effect on the public, according to the Rambam. That's what it means. I said, watch my hat, because ich bin a Hasidic, right? I'm a Hasidic Jew. And the idea of having effect on the public is very, very important. If I'm reading the Rambam correctly, he's telling you the standard of tzaddik is to affect the public, to do something for the world. The leader of the Hasidic movement is called the tzaddik. It's not an accident. Anyway, that's mine. Maybe right or wrong, but I think that's what the Rambam is doing. Okay, so now he says, don't believe what uneducated people tell you, that God, with fate, determines who's going to be righteous, who's going to be wicked. No, it's not true. And now he says he could have other qualities as well. He could be wise or foolish, merciful or cruel, all the other character traits. They're in your hands. The Rambam has a section of the Mishnah Torah called Hilchos Deos, which are the laws of character traits. You have a responsibility to build your character. I'm going to talk about that tonight in the Shir at 8:30, where that responsibility comes from, what it is. And of course, again, he means over time. It means developing your character. It doesn't mean you can snap your fingers and have perfect character. There is nothing or no one who forces him and doesn't decree upon him. It's nothing that pulls him to one of the other two sides. That is to say, pull him over and force him to be there. He himself, with his own understanding, inclines himself to whichever way he decides. This is what it says in Eicha, written by Jeremiah. That verse has lots and lots of commentaries, but the simple meaning is, when the Rambam is quoting here, is, from the mouth of the Most High does not come out good and evil. Rather, the person himself makes his own decisions and inclines himself to whichever way he wants to go. It can either to be good or to be bad. Now, since that is so, that means the person who sins, he is destroying himself. The consequences of his sin, which may be punishment from heaven, can't blame it on heaven, because he brought it upon himself by his own transgression. Therefore, it is appropriate for him to cry and to wail over what he did to his soul, that he caused it evil. And this was what the verse says, and further on in Yirmiyahu, what is a person groaning over his a man, an old grown man, on his sins? That's what he should be groaning over. And then it said, since we have the power at our hands, from our own understanding, we did all of this to ourselves, then we have the power to do teshuvah. The same power that we chose the bad, we can use it to choose the good. And therefore it's appropriate to do teshuvah, to avoid, to abandon the wickedness that we had. And that's what the verse says. There's a continuation. He's explaining a continuation of ideas in Prophet Jeremiah. We will search out our ways, and we'll analyze them, and then we'll return to Hashem. Now he says, this idea that I just told you is a great fundamental principle of the Torah. It's the pillar of Torah and mitzvos. As it says, here's an explicit verse that says it word for word. Behold, I've set before you life and death, life and good, and death and evil. And another verse says, I'm setting before you this day blessing and curse. What do you mean setting before you? It's like you set a table and you invite a person to eat, and all the dishes on the table, and you choose what you want to eat. That's the image here. I'm setting these before you. You have the power to choose what you want. Again, only power, not authority, not right, not good, not valuable to do the wrong thing, not correct to do the wrong thing, but you have the power to choose. Just like at most tables where there are things set where not all of the things on the table will be good for you. Right? A person has the ability to choose among the various possible actions of a person between the good and the evil. And therefore, this is a very poignant verse. There was the revelation at Sinai, the ten pronouncements at Sinai. After it was over, we had this in detail in Va'eschanan, but it's also in Yisro. After it's over, the people come to Moses and they say the following: Behold, we have seen today that God can speak with man from heaven and man will live. We've seen that. Therefore, let's not do it again. Say, no, wait a second. You just said, you see that it can happen, you can live. Why don't you want to do it again? And the sentiment is, we survived by the skin of our teeth, and we have no confidence that we'll be able to do it again. So, yes, we know it's possible, but even though we know it's possible, and you see, to make a convincing argument, you have to show that you're realistic. If they had said it's impossible to hear God's voice and we don't want to hear it anymore, then Moses would have said, but you yourself saw it's possible. No, we saw it, we know it's possible, but we have no confidence that we can repeat that performance. So from now on, we want you to be the intermediary. God will speak to you and you'll speak to us. The next verse, God says to Moses, I have heard the words of this people. Everything that they have spoken is good. Everything that they spoke is good. Who would give that their heart should be, for me, the way it is right now, full of awe of me? Now, these are funny words for the creator of the universe to speak. Who would give? Who could make it so? You know, if I work on a project and I have a great success and I feel that I'm not the author of my success, and I say, who could guarantee that I would be able to do it again? That's because I can't guarantee it. So God is saying, who could guarantee it? It sounds like God is saying, I can't guarantee it. Maimonides says, that's true. He can't guarantee it because it's only valuable if it's a result of our own free will. If he guarantees it, then we become squirrels. So God made squirrels that are afraid. Good, that's nice. That just shows that God is a great creator. He wants us to grow by our own hand. He wants us to use our free will to create ourselves with our own character. So that's why he says it that way. He says it that way to alert us and to emphasize to us that we are in control. We have the power, therefore the responsibility to make these choices for ourselves. Kolomer, that is to say, the Creator does not force man and does not decree upon him to do good or to do evil. It's rather their hearts are in their own hands. It's handed over to them, and their hearts are under their control. Now, this so far is an explanation of the Jewish position. Now the Rambam engages a little bit of philosophical reasoning to explain why this is the Jewish position. Given other things that Judaism is committed to, This is a necessary part of the Jewish position. You can't have the rest of Judaism without this. Why not? If God would decree on a person to be righteous or wicked, or if there was something in the world that drew him from the moment of his birth to one of the two ways, or to one of the understandings, of the evil or the good, if it was programmed into him one way or another, as the fools make up from their own minds, how then could God command us via the prophets to do this or that and not to do this or that? Improve your ways. Don't go after the wicked. Since, according to this assumption, from the beginning of his creation, it's already decreed upon him that he's going to develop one way or another. There are no choices involved. It's built into him. Just like it's built into the mosquito to fly and to shine, and some of them have these shining areas in their bodies, and also to bite. So we programmed into the human being to be righteous or wicked. What then would the command? What would be the point of the commands? He would be incapable of changing his behavior. So then what would be the place of the whole Torah? The whole Torah is full of instructions that God has for man. That whole section of the Torah would be absolutely empty, inapplicable, if it were true that man didn't have free will. So that's one reason why the existence of free will is a necessary Jewish belief. That's one. And here's a second one. With what justice, what judgment, justice, ruling, could God punish the wicked or pay reward to the righteous? Shall the judge of the earth not do justice, as it says in Genesis? There's a second independent reason. One of the principal beliefs of Judaism is reward and punishment. How could the creator of the world give? Now, he noticed he starts with punishment and says reward afterwards. I'll explain that in a moment. What justice would there be? Let's take punishment. In punishing a person for what he does, if he could not do otherwise, if he was programmed by external force to behave in one way or another, what right would there be? The Rambam is asking a moral question. So, a person falls on and crushes somebody else's Ming vase from the 5th century, China, worth $10,000. And somebody says to him, "What did you do? Are you crazy? You know what that cost? It's going to cost you $10,000. And the guy says, "I tripped. In fact, Joe tripped me. He stuck out his leg and tripped me and caused me to fall. It's videoed on the security camera. Take a look." At that point, I think the owner of the Ming vase withdraws his claim. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I thought you were just falling down for the fun of it. Or you had something against me. You wanted to smash my vase. He tripped you? I'll go after him. But I'm not going after you because you couldn't help it." You don't punish a person for something that happens. If I say he does, I'm begging the question a little bit. Certain people want to take he does as free will by definition. You don't blame a person and punish a person for something that happens if it wasn't the result of his free will decision at some point or other. I'm protecting myself like a certain counterexample, but that free will has to be involved. If it isn't, there's no point to it. So how could God say, if you do this and this transgression, I'm going to punish you in this and this way, unless free will was involved in the decision to do the transgression? That seems to be straightforward and absolute. Reward is a little trickier. So let's see. Rambam says, if you didn't freely choose to do something good, then I can't reward you. I can't pay you reward. Mishalem lo schar. Right? Now, let's suppose a person does something good through no fault of his own. A is about to shoot B, kill B, murder B. Peter's walking along. Someone trips Peter. Peter falls on A, knocks him over, and stops him from shooting B. So, wow, Peter, you saved B's life. You're a hero. Then they look at the security camera. Well, not really. I mean, he was just walking by. Somebody tripped him and he fell and knocked the guy over and so on and so on. Now suppose that someone who sees the security camera, understands the whole thing, says, well, I'm going to give Peter $10,000. Nothing's gone wrong here. There's nothing unjust that's happening here. You can give people free gifts. There's no moral complaint, but you're not paying them a reward, because the word reward or salary depends upon earning it. It isn't reward. Rambam here, I think, is using the word with precision. Mishalim schar. That means to pay something earned. It's not earned. It can be a free gift, but it's not earned. Now, our picture of divine providence includes reward and punishment. And without free will, there can't be punishment and there can't be reward. There could be free gifts, but there can't be reward. So there are two reasons now why free will is a necessary part of the Jewish philosophy. One is that if we didn't have free will, then there would be no point to the commands and prohibitions in the Torah. That's a large part of the Torah. And number two, there would be no justice in the principle of reward and punishment. Those two, for the Rambam, make it absolutely incontrovertible. You cannot have Judaism without free will. Are we together? Okay. Now, just have a couple of minutes. Yeah. Now here's another objection, right? Don't be surprised and say, how is it possible that a human being can do everything that he decides to do, and his actions are under his control? Can anything happen in the world without the reshus, the authority of its creator, without his will? Surely God's concerns and goals for the world and his will are what is behind everything that happens. The verse says, everything that God willed, wanted, decided, preferred, he did in the heavens of the earth. And Rambam gives an answer. And he says, you should know that everything happens by his will, no question about it. And even so, our actions belong to us. How does this work? Just like God willed and created that fire and wind should rise on their own, and water and earth flow downward or sail downward, they go downward. That's why God created them. And the spheres revolve and carry the heavenly bodies. And also the other creatures of the world behave in the ways that they behave, because God wanted it that way. So God wanted that man should have the power in his hands, and his actions should be under his control, and there should be nothing that forces him to operate one way or another. So, when you see a person making a free decision, God wants, he desires and created man so that he will make free decisions. Of course, the question that's left over is, but what does he decide? You know, when he decides to eat the cheeseburger, chas v'shalom, right? When he decides to eat the cheeseburger, is that what God wants? So now here you have, you're on the border of a paradox, because God cannot decree, force, cause man to make a free decision, because if he forces it, it's not free. So if what God wants, if his goal, his purpose is that men should make free decisions, all he can do is give them the power to choose freely, And then he could inform them as to his preferences, God's preferences. But he can't guarantee it. Can't guarantee it not because he lacks power, but because the thing that he wants to happen, if it's done by his power, won't happen. It won't be the thing that he wants. It's a contradiction, yeah.
You can also give us like tests to choose the ability to choose between right and wrong. That's also God given. You know?
Yes, he does give us tests, but why is that relevant to what I'm speaking about?
No, like I'm saying is he doesn't choose our outcome, but the situations we live.
Oh yes, now that's very important. That we'll talk about that in detail. He creates the choice situations that we live under. He creates the options that we face. That's creating the spiritual growth for a person. That's certainly true, but not the outcome. He can't decree the outcome because then he won't get what he wants. Because what he wants is a free decision. Okay, we'll come back to that tomorrow.